So, hello everyone. Uh, Welcome to this week's colloquium. My name is Arun Parmekanti. I'm a condensed matter theorist here in the department. And it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Sami Mitra. Shami got his PhD in condensed matter theory at Indiana University, Bloomington, following which he spent a couple of years doing postdoctoral research in the field of chemical physics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And after that, he kind of moved to the Physical Review, where he currently holds the position of senior editor of Physical Review Letters. We thought it'd be interesting to, have Shomi come and visit the department, to have this discussion about kind of the changing landscape of, how one does science, how one disseminates science, and how, with all this discussion of open access with archive, what's the role of a journal, and, how to handle your dreaded referee B, who creates so much trouble for a lot of us. So we are hoping Shomi will shed some light on many of these issues. So Shomi did tell me at the beginning that he would be happy to have questions, and in fact, it would be nice to have this as a lively discussion during the colloquium. So if people have questions, you should feel free to put up your hand, and you can kind of ask Shomi, and hopefully it'll be like a lively discussion during the colloquium. So with that, sure, welcome.
Thanks, Arun. I'm told that I won't be able to tell if the mic is working, but you will be able to tell me if it's not. Thank you, Arun, for inviting me. I do have a bit of an indirect connection to this university in that my PhD advisor, Alan McDonald, got his PhD from here. So that's kind of a connection. But so as Arun said, I encourage discussion, questions, whatever. I mean, this is not a physics talk, so there is no, great result I have to get to at the end of it, no matter what. So if I get bogged down on slide 3, that's perfectly fine with me. I mean, it's entirely possible that there'll be questions from members of the audience, which will generate discussion, maybe information that you'll find much more interesting than anything I have to say. So feel free to ask me questions. Apparently, folks on Zoom will be able to type in questions. And so there it is. And again, so I said, I mean, I have a prepared format for it. I moved some slides around yesterday to see where we can get to, but it's all immaterial. Let's put it that way. So just to give you a lay of the land of the journal that I work for, PRL changes over time. This is what it is roughly today. We published about, it comes out in a sense, a weekly compilation. I mean, the papers are constantly produced, but we make a issue every week, and we are publishing roughly 50 papers a week now. Substantially different from what we did as recently as 10 years ago, when we were publishing close to 80 papers a week. There was a decision made around that time, maybe about 7, 8 years ago, to reduce it. And the way I see it is PRL is kind of a unique journal in that we're trying to do 4 different things, which sometimes seem to me to be mutually exclusive. So one, we are a large journal. Most of the general physics journals, which publish in all areas of physics, Nature Physics, for example, or PRX, and other journals are like that, such are published of the order about 1/10 of the number of papers that we publish. So size is something we have. It does have its disadvantages that I may cover, but it does give us 2 advantages. One is that we are broad. So as you can see from here, we publish areas in a very large number of areas. And some of these areas, the question which I have on the next slide, are historical reasons. The distance between what's physics and what's chemistry is very short in some areas and completely different in other areas. So these are same journal trying to be all different things to different communities. So that's the breadth of it, we are representative in any given field, by which I mean that if we claim we publish a paper on this or that field, let's pick nuclear physics or plasma physics or something like that, our aim is to publish enough papers in that topic so that it kind of represents the field from the point of view of somebody looking in from outside the field who is not familiar with what's going on. You'd be able to see like a year's worth of published PRLs and kind of get a sense of what the people in the field consider to be important. And our contention is that if you just publish maybe 1 or 2 papers in any particular field, they could be very significant papers, but they don't give you a sense of the progress in the field, the arc of the field. And that we try to do, and that we can only do with a combination of the breadth and the representation. That's why we have the size. But at the same time, in this day and age, where things like exclusivity, how selective you are, play a role, PRL is indeed a very exclusive journal. So if you look at any particular field, as people will recognize, it is not easy to get a paper into PRL. So any given field, it's very, it's selective. So we are a big journal, not because we are not exclusive, it's just because we publish a lot of fields. So that's kind of where we are roughly. This is just a little ad for the year. I have 2 ads here. This is the first one, which it's an online collection of the year, which we did for the first time. We've done other retrospective kind of collections before. So if you look at it, these are roughly 50 some articles. It's as if a year's worth of PRL were collapsed to 1 week's worth and what you would see. And so these were picked for a variety of reasons. I guess this outlines why, and you'll get a sense of what the journal is. If you have no idea what PRL does, I mean, this will give you some sense. We did it for the first year in 2024. I understand diligent editors are at work again doing it for 2025. And this is the second ad, which tells you that despite all kinds of considerations of what's significant and what's not and so on, PRL has had a good track record over the last several years, but not the last year. For 13 consecutive years ending in 2023, we had a PRL cited in the official write-up that they have for experts by the Nobel Committee. And the interesting thing to me is not just that it's a great ad for the journal, but also you'll see that the number of fields covered here is very broad. I mean, so it's all kinds of prizes given for work done decades ago, prizes given for work done very recently, and then of course that kind of it's very interesting. And this is a slide, I lump them all together. I sometimes go and give talks about conferences. Mostly my beat is 2D materials, quantum Hall, graphene, and that kind of stuff. So people there want to know, what's there. So this is kind of PRL's footprint. For those of you who are familiar with the world of 2-dimensional physics, quantum Hall effect, gallium arsenide, now graphene, TMDs, you'll see that PRL has a great footprint in these areas, including in some recent developments. So for example, here is a paper which got the field of MOS2 started, which some of you may be familiar here. That's quite recent. So this is, again, what is 2D? I mean, the reason I put it in quotes is just as a sidetrack. Meantime, any questions? I'm just rambling on here, so feel free to ask questions. But so 2D, I mean, the word 2D suddenly has appeared recently, and there are journals that have appeared called 2D materials. It's partly graphene, if you're familiar, those of you who are familiar, kind of, it's a whole discussion about what is 2D physics. And so there was, but 2-dimensional physics in the sense of semiconductor heterostructures has been around forever. There are areas such as, somewhere here, I have the discovery of the AFM paper. I mean, these are all studying surfaces, 2D material. So the way people understand terms also changes over time. So for example, the word of du jour is quantum materials. You're a quantum materials guy, but when they say quantum materials, like what, gallium arsenide wasn't a quantum material? I don't know. I mean, so things like that, words change meanings, and then big words come. Now you have the word quantum, but somehow the word nano has kind of slipped away from the lexicon. Why? Don't ask me. All right, so this is what is physics. So one of the existential challenges for a journal like PRL is the very definition of physics. So here I talked about graphene. So here is an example. So this is a slide from the year 2017, a few years into the advent of graphene as we understand it in the modern sense. And you'll see this is a presentation by the conference chair, and there are words such as optoelectronics, biotechnology, material science, energy. Each of these words is a large field unto itself, and practitioners in each of these fields are not necessarily thinking of themselves as physicists. So here is a challenge a journal like PRL has, right? So when graphene first, in the modern sense, came to be, so to speak, you know, the Nobel was given out soon after. The two laureates, they were physicists, and they came from the world of physics. Initial days, graphene was all the challenge, the problems being addressed, the practitioners, the techniques came from the world of physics. Move forward just 10 years, and if you went to an average graphene conference in 2017 and more so today, most people in that conference are not from the world of physics anymore. So very quickly, there are fields which wax and wane in their overlap with what is physics and what is not physics. Now, there may be people in this room who are working with large collaborations at LHC or LIGO, for example, where that question would largely be meaningless. I mean, the overlap with the world of physics is, whatever it is essentially unchanged, I would say, from 20 years ago. So these are challenges that are topical, and that's the, you know, when I mentioned quantum, for example, but also what's physics and what's not physics depends on which area of physics you're in. So that's, but PRL publishes in all those areas, so that's the challenge we have. I will skip this. Here is another challenge. So I'm just going into random thoughts because this is challenges. So here is a case of, so question for you. So these are the 20 most cited PRLs in the year 2021. So in the year 2021, these papers received the most citations in PRL. So the question is, how many of these papers contributed, if you look at the years on the left, how many of these years papers contributed to PRL's 2022 or 2023 impact factor? Anyone? No? Zero. And the answer is zero because what's the definition of the impact factor? Anyone? Don't you guys obsess about the impact factor? No, that's the H5. The impact factor is basically, it's a 2. So it's a sliding time window. So the impact factor for any given year is the number, you define it for a journal. So the impact factor for a journal for any given year, let's say 2022, is in the numerator, you have all citations received by the journal in the preceding 2 years, so 2020 and 2021. And in the denominator, you have the total number of citable entities in that journal in those 2 years. So in 2021, this paper on the top, this is that DFT paper, received over 14,000 citations in that year alone. However, it doesn't contribute to our impact factor in 2021 because it was published in 1996. In fact, all of these papers were published outside that time window, the 2-year time window. And so none of them contribute to our impact factor. In fact, I did it for the top 50. I think there was one paper. So this is one of the challenges of a journal like PRL, that we publish a lot of highly citable and still being cited papers, but they are the so-called long arc of physics, standing the test of time and all that kind of good stuff. And so they contribute nothing. So if you were after the impact factor purely as a metric, and you're a journal administrator, publisher, whatever, it would be totally in your interest to publish papers primarily in areas that are very topical, you know, the topic of the day, not necessarily long lasting or not having much. So that is a challenge, right? So we have, in fact, in the year graphene, the slide I just skipped, but in hindsight should not have, but I have. It is, there were years in which we were getting more papers on graphene than in all of nuclear physics in the wake of, and then these papers were so highly cited that the average impact was more than 2.5 times that of the journal. But of course, we didn't want to publish, a lot of papers on graphene in the immediate aftermath. So we were rejecting, necessarily a large fraction of would be highly cited papers. And that is always a challenge with the journal like PRL. Not sure what the answers are. Yeah.
So do editors have to obsess about this?
We would prefer not to. I mean, we think about it. We are well informed, but we don't obsess in the sense that we know the reality and we don't want to change PRL as we know it. In other words, if we were truly obsessive about it, we would look at this paper and say, oh, this is likely to be highly cited, but it's the month of November. Let's not publish it in December. Let's wait till January. So it'll receive citations for 2 full years and be counted in the impact factor rather than being published in December and just receive citations for 1 year. 1 year, 1 month. So those are the considerations that would come into play if we were obsessive. Ergo, we are not obsessive. All right, so this one, I flashed it up there because, and we've had discussions about this all day today. I can go into it in more detail if you want later on. The point here is that we do have a policy about the usage of AI in writing and reviewing of papers. This policy reads well, it's precise. However, this policy was written last year, I believe, or maybe early this year. And the problem I see, and this is not just us, is that whatever you write, whatever policies you make, the advent of AI is fast moving enough, and the people writing such policies are probably not as well informed as they might be compared to some of the people in this room, for example, that these policies may become dated. To give you an example, up until fairly recently, journals had been advised to do AI. There was some AI tracker checker rules. You put the paper in and you say if it's generated by AI. But now the concern is if you put the paper in those trackers, that soaks up the data and that's not secure. So you shouldn't do that. So I know the exact same consideration applies to papers submitted by students at universities that I've heard. So, these things are fast moving. We don't know, but we have people think about it. It's not something we don't confront, but it's an existential challenge. It'll change very quickly from year to year. Yeah.
The slide showed updated, so I don't know if it's somewhere on the website.
No, I am sure it's dated. This one is undated because I took a screenshot. There is a date of this. I don't know. I mean, I think, so one of the challenges, not just in this scenario, but in all kinds of similar scenarios, is people go in year one, there's a lot of people in there, a lot of excitement, a lot of thought. We should do this, we should do that. Policy, yes. I mean, it's not just, not just the journals. There are umbrella organizations that are. The question is, do you keep up? I mean, normally it's not an issue so much. But in this extremely fast-moving scenario affecting all of us in various aspects of everything we do, from generating the data, hopefully not, but to writing the paper, fixing up the paper, generating plots, writing, all of those, it's changing very fast. I don't know exactly what, and also, what do you do if people don't follow, right? I mean, is it, can you make up policies and then say, we have no mechanism of enforcing? I don't know. Yeah, I think we actually have questionnaires and people can, and we get feedback all the time. This one, let's see. I'll skip this. All right. So the question is, what role? So one of the bigger challenges I think about. So currently, journals, why they exist and why they even should exist, and such considerations change over time. So I was a student in India, and back, this was some decades ago, but back then, if somebody wrote a paper, we would just not even be aware of the existence of the paper unless we went to a library, some dusty corner in some library at some university, and picked up some bound copy of a paper or maybe something on a shelf and looked at it. There was literally no way to know that something even existed unless somebody informed us somehow that, oh, they had heard of this or that paper. Now that's no longer the case. So immediately, this part of the journal's responsibility, the dissemination part, has largely gone away from the journals. If you are working on the quantum spin liquid, you do not rely on a journal to see what is being published. You look at Google Scholar or whatever, and you see what's going on at the archive. But the wider audience, maybe that, not everybody, if you're doing some important work on quantum computation, you're not expecting the person in the next building over to look at the archive. Perhaps they're looking at journals, especially if there are very, high-profile journals like Nature and so on. Maybe, I don't know. They validate research. I think I've talked to people even in this room who consider that publication in what they perceive to be an esteemed journal is valuable stamp that this is validated research, as opposed to, stuff on the archive that has not been published or doesn't get published. Now, that is true today, and I've had discussions with people as to whether this will be true a few years from now. We don't know. Curating and highlighting of work, yes, that is the role of the journals, but of course, curation and highlighting has become now easier thanks to Google Scholar, searching mechanisms, all kinds of even AI-driven searching mechanisms. I don't know if people use Profi here, dimensions. There are tools out there which, do some of this. And the last one is not of the journals doing. It works for the journals, but the question is, we currently have a system in place where when somebody is applying for a job or applying for tenure, people try to look at what they have published in what journal and look at metrics and so on. That is a level of importance accorded to the journals, which is probably not ideal. And there's no reason to think that will persist 10 years from now. We don't know. It wasn't the case to this extent 30 years ago. Maybe it'll change. So this is, often I end my talk on this slide, and I have one more after this, but this is like a rambling and all put together on a single slide. So some of these are existential questions, and I claim that all of these questions, as far as I know, have no answers. So if anyone says they know the answer to this, they don't know what they're talking about. However, and it's possible that they are not answerable. So one is peer review as we know it here to stay? I don't know. Peer review was not a thing as recently as less than 100 years ago. In fact, some of you may be familiar with the famous incident when Einstein submitted a paper to physical review. This is well before PRL, that they sent it out for review, and he was irate that how dare you send my paper, which I sent to you for publication, be sent to some random somebody. But that paper then, in response, he did make some corrections to the paper and so on. But that anecdote tells me that back in the 1930s, somebody of Einstein's stature was fully expecting to have a paper published without peer review. That's no longer the case. PRL will not publish a paper, however important it is, without peer review. We reject a lot of papers without peer review, but we don't publish any without peer review. And so this is, but this is the model we have now. And other models have come in place, open peer review. People say we don't need peer review. There are communities, such as the machine learning community, for example. There are papers, they're kind of an archival repository. A very large fraction of them have no desire to submit them to a journal or get them peer reviewed. And that's perfectly acceptable within the community. So peer review is here to stay as long as the involved community decides it's important for all the reasons. If they decide that they have a system in place that works perfectly well without traditional peer review, there's no reason to think it'll continue. Are we over relying on metrics? That's a question for you to ask yourselves. Are you over relying on things like H-index, impact factor, and so on when you decide to hire somebody or give somebody tenure and so on? Is it, and should it be this way? I mean, it wasn't this way before, as we said. So, there's that. Social media, that's an interesting one, because as recently as 5 years ago, there was a general sense that social media was a major player, even in the dissemination of serious science. There are people who still think so. And so, for example, we felt that if a paper was publicized on Twitter, there were even metrics, altmetrics. Are you familiar with this term, altmetrics? If you're not, ask somebody who is. But this is basically kind of some kind of a nebulous metric of the measure of a publication's presence in social media. I have no idea how reliable or what kind of social media. Is it Facebook, Instagram? I don't know. But the point is that people felt that social media is super important. I think the star of social media presence for scientific literature has dimmed a bit compared to 5 years ago. Not to say that it'll not come back up again. Who knows? Free. The fourth question, an interesting question. So, for example, every paper that we receive in large areas of PRL, for example, is available for free on the archive and on now on Google Scholar, sometimes weeks before it's even submitted to the journal. So the question of accessibility, dissemination, as I said. So the question is, why are these papers still being submitted to a journal? Especially with the costs and so on. It could be a various host of reasons, but it's something to think about. Very different from how it was, 30 years ago when I was or 40 years ago when I was in India, when, yeah, if you wasn't on the journal, it didn't exist. But that's no longer the case. Which funding model? That's an interesting existential question. Open access, there's a lot of discussion about open access versus subscriptions. I don't know what the future is. I think there's a sense that things are moving in the direction of open access. But you have to ask yourself, is that true across the board, geographically true, and all that kind of, these are open questions. We don't know the answers to these questions. Incentives to publish, we talked about that already. Oh, the next one, what is a paper? I've had this discussion with you. So, in the world of physics, we're kind of rather dated in this thinking, right? So think about it. What we think about as a paper in PRL or some other journal today, we call it a paper because we visualize it as an entity that is roughly unchanged for almost 100 years. So if you had taken a paper published in 1930, let's say, you took a printout of it, and you took a paper published yesterday, and you sent it to the printer, and you took a printout of it, especially a stodgy journal like PRL, black and white and all. I don't know. Okay, it would look roughly the same. And we have a sense of a paper, we have a publication date, receive date, publish date, and so on. Why is it? I mean, if you think about the newspaper, right? I mean, as recently as 20, 25 years ago, there was a sense of a newspaper. I live in New York, so we have the New York Times. We have the New York Times, which is, we still get the hard copy and is delivered to our door, let's say, before I wake up. But that's frozen in time. That newspaper was something that came out of a printer in a suburb of New York City at 1 in the morning, and it as my doorstep at 5:30, 6 in the morning. So when I look at it, I almost never read it anymore because every single item of that I have read earlier, sometimes a week earlier, because it's appearing on their website. So think about it. This question, what was the newspaper delivered to Long Island this morning, has a precise answer. I can pick it up and show it to you. But if you ask the same question, what was the New York Times website at 6 a.m. this morning? That question has no answer, because there is no desire on the part of the NewYorkTimes.com to maintain any kind of archival anything for a particular timestamp. It's continuously changing. It's an organic entity. There is no sense of asking what it was like at a particular time. That decision was made a few years ago, and there's no reason to think why a physics paper may not become like that, that you have some kind of a web entity that is changing over time, like a Wikipedia-like entry. It could happen. Journals may or may not have a role to play in it. We don't know. Anyway, that's another way to think about it. The last three here I've italicized. I don't know if you can see it because these are even newer things that I just put in this year. So one is, we discussed a little bit already, this, the rise, sudden, if you will, of AI in all aspects of what we do. I mean, get used to it, more of it. It's going to insinuate itself more into everything you do. From content creation, by which I don't mean, doing your experiments for you, but just, generating the plots and so on. And then once the paper is created, the searching of the paper, searching the literature, filtering, which is largely what the journals are doing now. It's possible that AI will do it even better than journals. We don't know. So these are pros and cons. I mean, today I was talking to somebody about the faulty literature that is sometimes cited by AI searches. My thinking is that that's some kind of a weird glitch. I have no idea why it exists. And my thinking is 2 years from now, you won't see it. So we'll see. Data storage, I mean, like other publishers, APS has become quite serious about storing of data. So we don't require you to give the data to us, but we kind of require you to at least make a reasonable statement as to how one can access the data. Should we store the data? We don't need to store the data, but it should be you shouldn't. I mean, there's been a lot of controversies lately in the world of physics, so we feel that you should be transparent about the data and its availability to to would-be readers. And the last thing is the geographic. Is interesting that we are the journals of the American Physical Society, the PRL, for many years now, for several decades. The majority of published papers in PRL and submitted papers, of course, have come from outside the US. So America probably was the USA, roughly about a third, but it was by far the single country. But lately, China, in some journals of the American Physical Society, has taken over as the #1 single published country, the country from which the most publications come. So that's a change. So there's a geographical spread that changes the landscape. Where is it headed? It depends on so many things that go well beyond the journals that we don't know the answers to these. All right. So Arun, how much time do I have?
Kind of following up on that point about geographic fitness.
Yeah.
Of course, in the past year, we've seen a lot of changes politically in the U.S.
Yeah.
Regarding scientific funding. So I'm wondering, have you seen like any effect of that?
Actually, at this point, it's difficult to say. There's a bit of a lag. Obviously, the papers published always. I mean, between the time research grants are received and a resultant paper is published could be, a couple of years, 3-4 years. So we haven't seen anything along those lines. PRL actually there was a dip during COVID for understandable reasons worldwide, and particularly in the US. We came out of the dip. We're doing okay. We'll see. We don't know. We haven't seen anything yet.
Thanks for the talk.
No, I'm not done. I have a few more slides. He has 15. He told me I have 15 minutes. Yeah.
So I have 2 questions about differences between journals.
Yeah.
So the first thing I was wondering is different journals have different stylistic forms.
Right.
On
Yeah.
pages. Do you think this is more of a style thing, or does this affect what kind of research journal is likely to publish? And then my second question, which I'll get in there, is how does the peer review process differ between journals?
The second one is a very big question. The first one I can answer. Yes, different journals want to publish different things, right? I mean, we're talking about, of course, there are subject-focused journals, right? Physical Review C publishes nuclear physics. Physical Review A publishes quantum optics and AMO. So that's different. but the papers, if they replace them by Latin words, would look identical. So it's not a question of subject deciding the form. The form comes from the journals, whatever considerations you have. In class, clearly, I mean, if you look at Nature Physics, you have two identical looking format articles which are in completely different fields. So yeah, so it's not one driving the other. Journals are different. Journals are different formats. So for example, an article published in PRL, even if you don't look at a single word, it just looks different from an article published in Nature Journal. So there's that. The peer review question, let me bench it for now. I may come back to it. All right, so this is a slide I thought, because the peer review question is more like, sometimes I give talks and people want to know about publishing a paper in PRL, what are editors looking for, and this and that. So I thought I'd just put it all in one slide. And so, this is basically the gist of it, right? So the first thing is selective journal. So PRL, as a very decent journal, receives papers that are mostly correct. PRL does not receive large numbers of papers that are clearly incorrect or insubstantial. So once you have received papers that referees are telling you are very likely not incorrect, correct, and they are in topical areas, then the decision to publish them or not publish them at some basic level is a subjective decision. And Arun, for example, is one of our board members, and he'll have to struggle with the fact that sometimes he gets an appeal on papers where there's nothing wrong with the paper. Why are you guys not publishing it? And one of the thought processes is, well, most papers we don't publish, there's nothing wrong with them. So the question is, so there's a subjective element. And the way we think about it is, it's almost like if a referee is telling us to publish a paper in PRL, we would like the referee to kind of go to bat for the paper and tell us why they're making that recommendation. If the recommendation is field is topical, paper is good, that's not good enough. So that's one way to think about it. Another thing I wanted to say is the papers, there are some areas of the paper which are, unfortunately or whatever, have greater significance than other parts of the paper, and sometimes the significance changes over time. To give you an example, the title of a paper inherently is always important, but think of it today. So a paper, when you submit a paper or before you submit the paper, you put it on the archive. The archive, all it has is the title and the names of the authors. People may click on the PDF, right, to look at the paper, but they'll only click on it if something strikes them. And what can possibly strike them? The title, the section, of course, the section in which the paper, the title and the names of the authors. So if the title doesn't grab them or doesn't convey what you're trying to do, so if it's overly cute but uninformative or drab and boring, it doesn't work. So you have to spend more time than you would really like to on something like the title. It's the same with the abstract. The abstract, back 30 years ago, the abstract was a self-consistent, self-contained entity of 50 words, which kind of gave the gist of the paper. The abstract is different today because the abstract is what's farmed by search engines and other things to make your paper appear in this or that stream somewhere. So the abstract, in a sense, has to be a collection of good keywords rewritten in a form that is very readable. So if you're writing a paper on, I don't know, some kind of Raman spectroscopy in graphene, and somehow you forget to use the word Raman in the abstract, even if it's clear from the context, some search engine doesn't pick it up. So you have to spend more time than you'd like on the abstract. Same with the figures. As you know from experience, I'm sure there are lots of people who just flip through the figures and the captions and they try to get a sense of the paper. So some journals go over the top with the figure captions, but you've got to be. All right, so the decisions that journal editors make, that's kind of partly not quite related to your question, but okay. So one is physics, the results, and scope. So one of the existential problems we have as editors is we've got the paper in front of us, we're looking at it, and we're trying to figure out two things. A, this is before we send it to referees. We're not trying to figure out if it's right or wrong. We're trying to figure out what did they actually do, And B, why do they, the authors, think it's important? Sometimes it's extremely difficult to figure that out. In fact, I challenge you to go and look at a year's worth of some random journal, not a year's worth, sorry, a day's worth, and try to figure out from every paper quickly what they did. People will write 3 paragraphs of why the field is important and this and that, great. But that's not what they did, right? They did something specific to that paper. So those kind of things are important to kind of make it easier. Same, and the referee reports. So when we ask a referee to look at a paper, we have 2 major asks for PRL in particular. As I said, the second one I made already below. The most important task of the referee from our perspective is the paper correct? Because we certainly don't want to publish an incorrect paper. Most papers, as I said, in PRL are not recognizably incorrect. So if the paper is correct, then are you, the referee, going to tell us that we should publish it? If so, make us, we are non-specialist editors, make us understand why you are making that recommendation. So that's what we look for in a report, those 2 things. And so your job as an author, remember, and we had this discussion at lunch, you were submitting your paper to our journal. You could have submitted it to some other journal, but you didn't. Maybe you did, but now it's with our journal. So it's your job as the author to make it easy for us, the editors. You should try to make it easy for the referees, and in the eventuality that we publish it, you should make it easy for readers. And it's on you to make that, and now there are all kinds of tools, including for things like obtuse language and all should not really be, and maybe it was a problem before, but it shouldn't be. That's an effort. I mean, you've done the research, you're ready to move on, but I think that's the worthwhile.
Burden when you ask the referees to make a case for something to be published in PRL. The referee may think it's interesting, but they may not care enough because it's not something that impacts them. So is that a fair thing to do, to ask the referees to make a case for why?
So the question to ask is, if not the referees, then who? If not the referees, then we don't want to ask the authors, because everything is important, right? So if not the referees, then it could be some individual editor or somebody like yourself. Now, there are other journals that do this and other organizations where every paper in a particular field goes through like a gatekeeper editor. They have that scenario. Now, that is problematic because I can name very famous people that you and I will recognize, let's say people even in your field. But if I tell them that every paper that addresses some aspect of the Kitaev model or something will go to that person, and it'll go to peer review or get published if that person likes it, but thumbs down, thumbs up scenario. That's not fair. That's the kind of bias that journals used to have before. So we actually go to referees more than other selective journals do. I mean, we reject without review perhaps at the 35, 40% level. Other journals do it at the 75% level. We're asking the referee to make those judgment calls, but also correct, incorrect, and then. But we're also asking the referee to kind of be a stand-in for the community. So ideally, if we had the time and the resources, we'd take it and go to a room full of 50 referees and ask them, hey, come on, give us a general thing, prepare a big old report on the reports, and then make a decision. But we cannot go to 50 people, we can go to 3 people, 2 people. So we try to get a sense from them, are they speaking from the community? And then it is our job to, calibrate that. So we have the paper, we have the referees, we have knowledge of where the paper comes from. We don't ignore that. We have a general sense of the topicality of the field, and we kind of put them all on a kind of a nebulous grid and make a decision. And at the end of the day, as I think we've discussed that it's almost as if we have 20 labs generating 4 papers each, let's say on a field, 80 papers a year. All of them are equally impressive, maybe 60 of them are very impressive, but PRL, let's say, has the bandwidth to only publish 10 of them. So somehow we will have to figure out which 10 out of those 80 papers should we publish? There is no way to make a perfect decision. It's just that over time, on average, we'll make the right decision. That's the best we can do. Oh, this one I was proud of because I generated it with ChatGPT yesterday. So we had, this is a kind of a layout of the referees, where the referees come from in 2024. And the reason I did it is that here is US, I can't read it from here, but 30-some%. This is China. This is, what's the number? 7%. That number was almost an order of magnitude smaller a decade ago. So that's, referees from China increasing also. So I'm also proud of this like three-dimensional aspect of this chart because I generated ChatGPT, first made a bar chart, and I told it to make a pie chart, which it did. Then I said, oh, there are too many small slices. Can you drop all but the top 10 and make the rest rest? So it did that. And then I said, okay, can you give it a little bit of a 3D look? And then it did that too. So. All right, so for the grad students in this room, the one takeaway message, when you submit a paper to PRL or any other good journal, is to buy this free book. I think it's available for free pretty much everywhere. And internalize those 3 words. Anything you can say in simple words? No, see, even I'm messing it up. That's it. Don't try to just say that. All right, that's it. Thank you.